kind of remember all the terrible things that happened to the nation of Philistia, and particularly to their capital cities around their country. Every time they took the stolen Ark of the Covenant to a new city, the men would break out in tumors. There would be a plague, and lots of people died. So in chapters 4 and 5, we see all of that happening. Tonight I want us to take a look at the aftermath, how the Philistines finally decided to get rid of the ark. They didn't want it anymore, and so they were going to send it back to Israel. So they have to figure out how to get that done. And then we're going to jump about 20 years and talk about Samuel not just as a priest, but as a priest who was also one of the judges. We've got kind of the end of the book of Judges blended in with the first part of 1 Samuel. And so we'll talk a little bit about his work as a judge. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 6. Let's read the first 9 verses and then kind of get a look at how things are shaping up for the Philistines. When the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." They answered, "If you return the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it back to him without a gift. By all means, send a guilt offering to him. Then you will be healed, and you will know why his hand has not been lifted from you." The Philistines asked, "What guilt offering should we send to him?" They replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers, because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. Make models of the tumors and of the rats that are destroying the country, and give glory to Israel's God. Perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did? When Israel's God dealt harshly with them, did they not send the Israelites out so they could go on their way? Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pin them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in a chest beside it, put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory toward Beth Shemesh, then the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us, but it just happened to us by chance. So the Philistine leaders are pretty sure that they don't want the Ark of the Covenant anymore. They've had all they want of that. So how do you figure out what to do when you don't want the Ark of the Covenant anymore? Well, you call your best religion professors, because religion professors know everything. And you get the religion professors in there to tell you exactly what kind of approach you need to take to this Ark of the Covenant that you've been housing for the last 7 months. The problem with these religion professors is they're all Dagon worshipers. Right? There's not a soul in this group that knows anything about the God of Israel. So they're making it up as they go along. They're just trying to figure out what would be the best way to go about getting rid of the Ark of the Covenant. And the thing that they are most emphatic about is don't send it back without some kind of gift. Right? You took him and you took his box, and you've taken him and held him hostage for 7 months. So you need to send some kind of gift to this God. What's interesting to me about their approach is the God that was doing all these things to them already owned all the gold they had. It wasn't as if they were giving him anything. When Paul is on Mars Hill, he talks about how the God that made heaven and earth does not need to be worshipped with human hands because he made everything. But the answer they come up with is, don't send it back unless you send some gold along with it. Put it on a new cart, so special new built carrying vehicle for it. It's a special occasion. They know that this God is important, and you don't want to send somebody's used cart. So we're going to build a brand new cart, make it as nice as we can to carry the ark. Then make golden tumors And did you notice it said make models of the tumors? So I'm not sure which guys lined up to say, here, check out my tumors. But they impersonated the tumors with gold and golden rats. So that's kind of an interesting combo. Think about the plagues of the Middle Ages in Europe. What did they figure out was the cause of it? Fleas on the rats, right? So if you've got rats that are bringing you the plagues, then, maybe God used that same game plan back in Philistia. We don't know. But make golden rats and golden tumors and put them in a box and put the box on there with the Ark of the Covenant so that you can send those things back to the God of Israel. And take 2 mama cows, separate them from their calves just to hedge the bet just a little bit. Now, city boy, but correct me if I'm wrong. If you take 2 calves from mamas that are feeding them, will the mamas not immediately go looking for the calves? Right? When you turn them loose, that's what they're going to do. He says, or these experts say, you want to get you 2 mama calves and that have never been yoked before. So they're wild cows, right? So tie up a couple of wild cows away from their calves, and then if they go to Israel, we'll know it was God. We'll know it was legitimately God that was doing this to us. So they hedged the bet. They set it up so that it should go the opposite direction. But as soon as they let the cows go, they head for the town of Beth Shemesh, which was kind of a border town between Philistia and Israel. And the folks of Beth Shemesh were just thrilled because they look up and sure enough, here comes the Ark of the Covenant on this cart being pulled by 2 cows that are bellowing the whole way coming up the hill. So they go out to meet it. They find a special place to set it. There's a big rock that they can set it on. And they do some things that are good and some things that are not so good. The first thing they do that's a good thing is they tear up this cart, right? So this brand new form of transportation that the Philistines made for the ark. They tear it up and they kill the 2 mama cows and use that to make sacrifices, right? So they build the fire out of the cart and they use the cows as sacrifices. Now, it's an acceptable sacrifice, it seems. There's no indication in Scripture that God was displeased at all with the sacrifice. But typically, what kind of animals did we use for sacrifice, male or female? Males, right? Males usually of the first year without spot or blemish was the way you chose them. They set the ark up on a large stone, and it gets dedicated as the Ark Stone, I guess they would have called it, and it kind of gets on that summer tour. The idea was if you were traveling, not only could you see where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be, where Achan got destroyed because he took the holy things at Jericho. What were some of the other ones we ran across? Anyway, there are all these different places that the Scripture says, and the site is with us to this day. Stones piled up by the River Jordan. You could go see all these things. Evidently at Beth Shemesh, there was a large rock where people could go by, at least for a few generations, and they could point it out and say, well, when the Ark of the Covenant was at Beth Shemesh, it sat on that rock right there. So it was kind of a holy-esque kind of place that Beth Shemesh set up for the Ark of the Covenant. But then they did something that was not so good. 70 of the men of Beth Shemesh decided that they would look and see what was in the ark. So they actually approached the ark and opened it up and looked inside. When I'm reading this text, I can't help but think of Raiders of the Lost Ark. For those of you that have watched this movie, at the very end, they open the ark and really bad things happen to the people who are opening the Ark of the Covenant. So 70 men die as a result of trying to get too close to the God of Israel. They open it up. They're getting into God's business in the Ark of the Covenant. And so 70 of those men die. You also have to ask yourself the question, if I was in the back of the line and those guys up there are not doing so well, would I keep going? How badly do I really want to see what's in the ark? When you get to chapter 7, then we get back from this excursion of following the Ark of the Covenant into Philistia and back to Beth Shemesh. And we get to talking a little bit more about Samuel. During this time frame, Samuel is still the priest. He's still kind of judge over Israel. But Israel is still worshiping the Ashtaroths. They're still interested in Baal and Ashtoreth, the kind of the national gods among the people where they had gotten their inheritance. And because of that, Samuel is trying to draw them back to God, and it takes about 20 years. So Samuel's doing his job. He's being judge over Israel, but those people are not paying attention to what Samuel is saying to them. So finally, they are under the oppression of Philistia long enough, and they decide they need to give in and get back with God. So Samuel calls a great big confab of Israel. So this is another one of those occasions where all of Israel shows up in the same place for the same purpose. What was the last time? They all came together to punish the tribe of Benjamin, remember? And everybody comes together. Well, now things have shifted enough that the leadership, being Samuel, can just call for them and everybody shows up. So they get together just a few miles northwest of Jerusalem in a little place, and so all of Israel is together, and the Philistines find out about it. So the Philistines are going to come over and squash Israel and keep them from having these meetings where they're getting too unified, because if you have a group of people that you're conquering, that you've got under your thumb, and they get too friendly and they get too well organized, you may have a problem. So they came over to try to do something about this festival slash sacrifice slash unity celebration. And in response to their coming together, the God whose ark they stole before kind of takes care of things. Look at chapter 7, and we'll start reading in verse 10. Chapter 7, verse 10. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued, and they stopped invading Israel's territory. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The towns from Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to Israel, and Israel delivered the neighboring territory from the hands of the Philistines. There was peace between Israel and the Amorites. So Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year, he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. But he always went back to Ramah, where his home was, and there he also held court for Israel, and he built an altar there to the Lord. And it seems like the end. Thank you, Samuel, and we're done with you. But we just kind of close out his career because we're about to shift gears into the kingdom years. Now, Samuel is going to be very instrumental in helping God start the kingdom of Israel. But this is just about Samuel. Samuel as a priest, Samuel as a judge, Samuel as a deliverer of Israel. A couple of things in that passage I want us to look at real quick. Number one, God broke out against them with thunderings. This is, I think, the third time we've seen this, that when the Israelites went into battle, that sometimes they were facing odds that were against them, and that God used weather to get rid of the enemy, right? So evidently we have a huge thunderstorm. One of the battles we looked at, there was a huge hailstorm, and lots of people were getting killed by the hail on the enemy side. They panic, they run away. That's what happened in Gideon's battle when they rushed in, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon, and all of the enemy was so terrified they began to fight against each other. So God fights for Israel in this passage, and the Philistines are wiped out, or at least subdued against Israel. But the name of the place is really interesting. He calls the name of the place Ebenezer. He sets up a stone, and he says, we're going to call this place Ebenezer. When I say Ebenezer, you fill in the blank. Ebenezer Scrooge. Absolutely. Everybody, we were raised on Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer means that I've been brought to this place. Right? So when they're winning this big battle, he sets up a stone, and at this stone, he says, God brought us here. Right? This is God's victory. This is something that God has accomplished by bringing us to this place. Song number 500 in our book, I think. I meant to grab a book before I sat down. I got the right one. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. In the second stanza, the author picks up on this idea, and he says, here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He, to rescue me from danger, interposed his precious blood. Now, you know what the song's about. You've been singing it all your life. How many of you knew what the song was about when you sang it? Here I raise my Ebenezer. Nobody. That's what I thought. We sing some of these songs, and the poets do a great job of bringing Scripture into our songs, but we don't have any idea exactly what we're singing. So Ebenezer could have meant just about anything, but it means something good. Here I raise my Ebenezer. God has brought me to this place. It's because of God that I have my salvation. It's because of God that Jesus rescued me and gave me salvation. So next time you sing it, you'll know that that's a Samuel thing. In fact, Samuel sets up two different stones and calls them Ebenezer. There's this one, and there's one back over in chapter 4 where another battle is waged. So usually for Samuel, it seems, when things were going well in a battle, he would set up a marker and say, here's what God did for us. This is where God brought us in this battle. So here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. Things are good for Samuel, and he's doing a good job. Did you notice that he was all of his life the judge over Israel? So he's not going to be displaced as the judge. He's going to continue as the priest over Israel. He's got a lot of good things going for him, but as we go farther on, we'll find that there are a few things that were not so pleasant for Samuel. One of them being that the nation of Israel, now that they're unified, they're no longer interested in having a judge over them. They're going to start wanting a king. Right? And so that's going to be the next thing that we'll take a look at. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts? Mark?
Well, I'm thinking about the covenant. I guess they had some fear of the covenant. They didn't want to destroy it. They wanted to bring it back, I guess. Is that the reason?
I think they were terrified of the Ark of the Covenant just because everywhere they moved it, bad things were happening to them. So they caught on. If you take it to Gath and bad things happen, so you move it to Ekron and nothing bad happens at Ekron, well, it was just a fluke. And so they go to all these places with the Ark, and bad things are happening everywhere. And then you get the soothsayers, the religionists in there, and say, what do we need to do with it? And their answer is, well, let's kind of hedge our bet a little bit just in case it's a fluke, just in case it's not really God doing this stuff. Then we'll really know. But, the cows went straight back to Israelite territory. So they knew by the time the Ark got clear of them that really was the thing. And I'm sure as the plague began to clear up and as the tumors began to go away on the men of those towns, that they were impressed pretty quickly. But again, did the Philistines take the hint and go over to the Israelite camp and say, would you tell us about your God, because Dagon wasn't doing that stuff. They're still dedicated to Dagon. Remember, Dagon's head falls off, his hands fall off. They're still dedicated to Dagon. The God of Israel gives them tumors and a plague. They're still dedicated to Dagon. Dagon couldn't do anything about all the stuff God was doing, but they're still somehow dedicated to Dagon. And that'll tell you how strong culture can be. Once a culture gets dedicated to a thought, then it doesn't matter what good evidence you give them to the contrary, because if everybody agrees but it's wrong, they'll still agree because they're unified. And unity is stronger than truth at times. And it was certainly stronger than truth for the Philistines. They, as far as I know, very few of them, if any, decided to change their mind about who really was God.